Good afternoon and welcome to the ALCTS webinar, Talent Management and Succession Planning. I'm Eva Sorrell, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Our presenters today are Dr. Meredith Taylor and Dr. Sylvia Ellis Hall. Meredith has worked in higher education administration and research libraries for over 16 years. Her current role is in administrative operations for the Provost's Office at the University of Texas. Dr. Taylor also co-authored a study for ARL exploring the utilization of talent management strategies in research libraries. Sylvia provides leadership and vision for colleagues in higher education, government, and the information industry. A highly successful grant writer and fundraiser, she has more than 40 years of experience working as an administrator, development officer, and project manager. An accomplished writer and editor, she is an adjunct professor in the School of Information at San Jose State University. She is currently co-authoring a new book on succession planning in libraries. Their presentation today will discuss talent management and succession planning within the context of libraries and technical services. A few things to keep in mind for today's presentation. Today's webinar does not have interactive chat capabilities. If you wish to comment on today's presentation using Twitter, you may use the hashtag you see on the screen. We will not be monitoring the Twitter feed. If you have questions for Meredith and Sylvia, please type them into the question box on your screen and they will answer them as time permits at the end of their presentation. Questions which remain unanswered while we were on the air will be answered offline and the answers sent to all attendees. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive an email with links to the recording, the presentation slides, and an evaluation within 2 days. There may be a slight delay as I turn the presentation over to Meredith.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank you for participating in the webinar today, and I'm happy you are here. So my name is Meredith Taylor, and I will be speaking about talent management today. You might be wondering why someone in the Provost's office is talking about talent management in libraries, but I've been in my current position for about 3 years, but prior to that I was an academic librarian for 14 years, and my last position was as the Assistant Director for Organizational Development, which among other things, oversaw human resources at UT libraries. So I have practical experience as well as having done some research on this topic. And I'm happy to say that I will be returning to academic libraries this summer. One other thing I'd like to say before we get started is that I recognize that everybody has a different local context. Some of you have unionized employees, some of your employees have faculty status, some have tenure, and I also recognize that most all libraries are working within the context of a larger institution. What this means is you'll have different levels of freedom about what you can and cannot do around talent management. But that being said, I think that typically there is more flexibility than you think. There are often bureaucracies and cultural obstacles that need to be overcome, but they are rarely insurmountable. So what am I going to talk about today? Here's my agenda. I'm going to be speaking about what is talent management and why is it important. I'm going to talk about talent management in libraries and technical services in that context. I'm going to give a brief overview of the survey results from my Association of Research Library Talent Management survey. And I'd also, at the end, I want to make sure you have some real concrete, practical talent management takeaways for yourselves and your organizations. The objectives here, these are our learning objectives. I'm not going to read through them, but really to kind of shorthand here, at the conclusion of the webinar, first of all, I hope that when you will know what someone means when they talk about talent management and you understand its value. I also hope that you'll know that there's a certain imperative or call to action for libraries to be examining and using talent management. And also I hope that you won't feel overwhelmed by this concept of talent management and that you have some tangible ideas on how to get started within your organizations. So let's start pretty much at the beginning. So what is talent management? I am going to read you this definition because it's pretty important. It is an integrated set of processes, programs, and cultural norms in an organization designed and implemented to attract, develop, deploy, and retain talent to achieve strategic objectives and meet future business needs. Obviously, you could substitute future organizational needs since we are not working in the business world. I've bolded some of the really important concepts that you're kind of going to hear throughout my presentation in various places. But the first one is integrated. A lot of the process programs and norms and things that I talk about that are related to HR are not going to be new to you. They'll sound familiar, a lot of them. But one of the key pieces of talent management is that they are integrated. They're integrated within themselves, and they're integrated to the organizational strategy. The next piece is that you're using this talent management to attract, develop, and deploy and retain talent. So that's kind of that whole life cycle of an employee. And then the other very important piece is that you're using these talent management to achieve your strategic objectives. So there needs to be very close alignment between your strategic objectives, your strategy, your strategic plan, and your talent management and HR strategy. Just to also let you know, this is sometimes called strategic HR, so if you hear that, it's typically the same thing. And just to give you a little history on it, we've been talking about talent management since the late 90s and the early 2000s when McKinsey & Company, who is a multinational management consulting firm, published a report called The War for Talent. They followed up with a book in 2001, and this was right around the time of the boom of the dot-com industries, and there was a real fierce competition for information workers. So one of the key concepts that the book highlights and is part of this whole talent management philosophy is that it is certainly processes and programs and things like that, but is also a talent mindset. Which means it's really a deep conviction shared by the leaders of an organization that either the competitive advantage or organizational success comes from having better talent at all levels. And so it really urges companies or organizations to consider how to identify and retain the best available talent, but it also talks about how to disengage from workers that do not meet the new standards for talent in the knowledge era. So talent management is very, it's related to traditional HR, but it is different. So I want to kind of have a little conversation with you here about how that is different. So the first thing is traditional HR, typically it's separate HR processes and programs. You know, it can be things like performance evaluations, professional development program, things like that, but they're separate. When you're using talent management, you are integrating those practices and programs and processes in a very strategic way. Also with traditional HR, typically the unit of analysis or who you're looking at is an individual or manager skills focus. It's individual people. In talent management, it is really about organizational capabilities. So you're looking at the organization as the unit of analysis. Traditional HR often is reactive in nature in that there's a problem with a manager, an employee, a supervisor, something like that, and then HR reacts to that. Talent management is really about being proactive, about making sure you have the talent you need to meet your future strategic goals. Traditional HR tends to be about standardized procedures and compliance and risk management, while talent management is really about customized programming and consulting. And it certainly can be customized at the library level, but it can even be customized down to unit levels. So different divisions or units within the library might have different kind of talent management challenges and therefore need different talent management solutions. And the last way they differ is that, unfortunately, traditional HR is not always aligned with either the library strategy or a larger organizational strategy. So if you're an academic library, your university; if you're in a public library, your public library system. While talent management is aligned very closely with the library strategy and the university strategy, or again, the public library system strategy. So these are the elements of talent management. It looks like a lot, so I don't want to overwhelm, so I'm going to kind of break it down. I'm not going to go over all of them because some of them will look familiar, because again, these aren't all new, different HR processes and programs. It's just a different way of utilizing them and aligning them and integrating them. So the first area of these elements is strategy. You'll hear me talk a lot about strategy. Kind of the overarching strategy is going to be that business or that organizational strategy. So your library strategy, which of course is hopefully aligned to that higher level strategy, like your university strategy. So that's going to be really your foundational strategy, and then you're going to build your talent strategies on top of that. And then within talent management, you will have these sub-strategies of recruitment strategies, retention strategies, and compensation strategies. So recruitment is who you're bringing into the organization, retention, who you're keeping, and compensation is obviously how you're paying those people. Then you also, on the right upper corner, you have systems and programs. And so an HRIS system is a human resources information system. So that's typically something like, PeopleSoft, Workday, something that you use to manage your HR. And training programs, professional development programs, and leadership programs will probably look fairly familiar to most of you all. Coming down to the left lower quadrant here is you have process tools and assessments. Again, some of these will look very familiar, like your performance assessment, 360 assessment, things like that, but I would like to touch briefly on competency models, because that might be something some people aren't familiar with. Competencies are really more about how someone does their work, not what they do. So it's not the functional parts of their job, but how they go about the functional parts of their jobs. This is typically, some people describe this as soft skills, so it can be communication and customer service, for example, but it's also things that are a little more complex, like comfort with ambiguity, organizational agility, things like that. So building those pieces in is an important part of talent management. Another one I want to highlight is HIPO identification. That stands for high potential identification. So that is actually having a systematic and formal way of identifying your high potential employees. So your employees who have a very high potential for, leadership, large-scale contributions to your organization. Job analysis and design, that's really looking at not the person but the jobs. Do you have the right jobs, the right titles, the right job descriptions to do the work that you need and meet your strategic goals? And compensation analysis is fairly self-explanatory, but that's really looking at compensation not only within your library but across your larger organization, say if you're in a university, so campus-wide, but then also looking at it compared to market. And then the indicators is the last section, and that's really the metrics, the data. That's where you're going to get the information on, how you're doing, what's working, what's not working. So certainly things like organizational outcomes. Are you meeting your strategy, which can be certainly things around, like if you have a balanced scorecard kind of tool that you use to look at your to kind of grade your strategy, but also things like voluntary turnover rates, which is, does your organization know how often people leave voluntarily and why they leave? Also employee engagement. A lot of libraries or larger university organizations will do employee engagement surveys. So what are the scores? What are you hearing back from your employees in those areas? So I've talked very much about, so these are the areas, these are the elements, and I've talked very much about kind of this integration. So I want to kind of give you a couple concrete examples of how these things are integrated really in a day-to-day example. So looking at, so the first thing is say there's some managers, and there might be some HR professionals at the webinar today, there might be managers, supervisors, or individual contributors. So I'm going to kind of present some scenarios that might be appropriate for all of you all. So either if you're maybe an HR professional, you have managers coming to you talking about the fact that they keep losing employees, they can't retain employees, or maybe you as a manager, you're experiencing the fact that you are losing a lot of employees. So the very first thing is to look at, okay, is there a retention strategy that the library has? And therefore, do you have one? And if you have one, is it working or not? One way you might want to know is looking at your voluntary turnover rates. Is there really a turnover problem, or is there more of a perception of a turnover problem? And also, is there turnover problems in certain units and not in others? So is it an organization-wide issue, or maybe specific to certain divisions or units? Employee engagement scores. Again, are your employees engaged? Do they feel rewarded and satisfied? That's important to know when looking at why people might be leaving. Compensation, that's a piece of why people may be choosing to leave if their salary is not competitive and equitable, either within the organization or to campus or to market. Hypo identification, coming back to this concept. So are you identifying high potential people and putting systems around to keep them? Or are those really high potential people feel like they don't have opportunities or being recognized for their potential and they're moving on? Development plans. Do you have individual development plans for your staff where they know that you're investing in them and they feel like there's a reason to stay? Do you have a training program? Do you have professional development and leadership programs and development programs? So you can see how all these things fit together kind of in answering kind of one simple question. You can see how all these things are integrated. Another example is, say, a hiring manager or a hiring supervisor is either coming to you if you're an HR person, or if you are one of those people, are experiencing unsuccessful searches. You cannot find the right people that you need for the right positions. So again, you go back and figure out, well, do you have a recruitment strategy in your library? And if so, is it working? Maybe you need to look at your job analysis and design. Are the job postings that you're putting out there, do they have the functional requirements that you really need? So therefore you're actually attracting people who functionally can do what you want. And are there competencies that are in there? Are you outlining the competencies that you're looking for so that you're actually getting employees that can not only do the functional piece, but they can do it in a way that aligns with, your competency needs and your values of your organization? Compensation. Maybe you're losing a lot of people in your pool because when you offer them the job, your compensation isn't meeting market or other needs, so you're losing them there. So you need to be looking at that. And again, when you're in the recruitment phase, can you offer training, professional development, and leadership development programs to potential employees as a way to help make your organization more attractive? So again, this is just kind of an example to show you how all these things are very related, and if you just do have those programs and those processes separated, then often you're missing some of these important things that are going to play into your overall strategies. And just to let you know, all these areas that are highlighted in red are areas that we investigated. These were sections or questions on our survey when we did our ARL survey. So I'll talk about a little of those later, highlight them when I start talking about the survey results. So we talked a little bit about what talent management is, but I also want to talk about the value of it. There is certainly research that indicates that when organizations are implementing and using talent management, that it provides a value not only to the organization but to the individuals who work in the organization. So it has been shown through research to increase organizational capabilities, but also increase personal abilities. So there is a value to talent management for both the organization and the individual. So at this point in time, I hope you better understand kind of what talent management is and what's the value of it. But I want to also look at talent management in the context of libraries and technical services, both specifically, because talent management is valuable, it's important, but is it needed in in libraries and specifically technical services areas? My thesis is yes, and so these are kind of some of the supporting evidence that I would put forward, that there really is a kind of a call to action for libraries and technical services organizations to be looking seriously at talent management. Most of this you probably know because you're living it, but I still just want to put this out there so that we're all kind of on the same page. So the first thing is, obviously, libraries are changing. We're moving from collections-based organizations to service-centered organizations. And a lot of the services we're implementing are very technology-driven services. So that really does require a different skill set, which is to my next bullet point, is work in libraries is increasingly being driven by technology and becoming increasingly complex. So we're needing different kinds of workers than we used to, and we're needing a lot of IT and information workers. And to the point in my third bullet is we're actually having to compete now with private sector in ways that we did not have to compete before for this technology and information workforce. Another point I'd like to make is libraries are becoming, academic libraries I should say, specifically are becoming integrated in campus initiatives around student success, teaching and learning, research. So again, that is needing, we are needing different skill sets, more teaching skill sets, data research, data management skill sets. And in general, just kind of as a summation, is really we have different needs in a 21st century library which require different jobs and different skill sets. So do we have the talent, and are we managing our current talent to be able to meet those needs? And obviously we have continuing budget cuts and constraints. So there is also the situation there where we need to typically do more with less. So that makes it even more critical that you have the right people doing the right jobs and the right people in the right places. So that's kind of the library's landscape. When you look at libraries' workforce, there are also some interesting things that are going on in the workforce, some demographic changes which I think also signal an increased need for talent management. First of all, in 2009, ALA did a study where they predicted 30% of the librarian workforce would be retiring between 2015 and 2025. They originally estimated 2010 to 2020, but then the recession hit, of course, in 2008, and so more people stayed on longer because of the uncertain economic climate, so they actually kind of recalibrated their estimation to 2015 to 2025. So, and we're, as you know, we're to about 2 years into this decade of a lot of attrition due to retirement. So I would not be surprised if all of your organizations are starting to experience this attrition, which means, you know, you often have quite a loss of institutional knowledge. Looking at just the academic library side of the house, and specifically ARL libraries, in 2014, based on their numbers, ARL had experienced an 82% turnover rate in the executive leadership of ARL libraries. So these are your deans, your university libraries, your directors of libraries. So that had been about 82% in the 9 years. So from 2005 to 2014, there had been an 82%, and in 2013 alone, there had been a 25%. Turnover in executive leadership. So a lot of change at that kind of senior leadership level. And but talent management is not just for senior leadership kind of leadership problems. There's also demographic shifts just in the workforce. And here's a little bit of data to kind of demonstrate that. This again is ARL data, so it is a subset of academic libraries, but I would not be surprised if non-ARL libraries and also public libraries are seeing the same kind of trends. So basically, to boil down what this is telling you is in 2010 the highest majority percentage of library workers were in that 50 to 59, that kind of area. So you can see that the curve is is over to the right based on age. But then by 2015, just 5 years later, you can see the peak of the highest percentage has swung all the way back over to the 35 to 39, and then of course in 2020 those people have aged, and now it's moved over to the 40 to the 45. So really that you can see that there is, really kind of that bifurcation between the workforce. And what that tells you is, because there's been this large switch from, a lot of workers in the kind of later stages probably of their career versus into, into the younger ages, you probably have different generations of library schools and trainings. So they're coming at it from a different perspective. And if you have younger employees, you probably have employees at different stages of their career. They might be more mobile. They might be looking for more development and leadership opportunities. So you have your workforce looks very different, and you might need to be reacting to it in a different way and employing talent management programs and processes in order to meet the needs of that different workforce. Now when looking at technical services, so kind of drilling down a little bit more into that specific division, this is kind of the landscape. Again, you all are living this, so you probably know this, but I'm going to briefly cover these as well. So the nature of the work is changing, as you all well know, and really to the second point, technology is driving the change, and it's requiring more IT skills. Whether it is, cataloging, changing standards, metadata, digital materials, whether it's digital preservation and cooperative preservation, whether it's data curation and management. That kind of work is changing, and it's becoming much more dependent on technology. We're also seeing a distributed nature of the work in technical services, and it's distributed in a few ways. Some of it is just being redistributed within the technical services staff, in that paraprofessionals are doing more of the work that was once considered solely librarian work. So you're kind of seeing a shift in who's doing what kind of work, so that kind of redistribution. You're also in some cases seeing distribution of the work across branches or affiliated organizations. And you're also seeing some of the work distributed outside of your organization due to outsourcing. So that's changing kind of where the nature of the work and where the work is happening. And also there seems to be a trend where we see that work is either becoming simple or complex, and this is related to the outsourcing issue, in that some of the issues of outsourcing cataloging, getting shelf-ready materials, those kinds of things are taking away a lot of the kind of work that's in the middle, which leaves either very simple work because it is not feasible or cost-effective to outsource it. You might use student workers, things like that. So it's the very simple work, or the very complex work, which might be original cataloging in certain languages, and so that might be too complex to really outsource. So those are the kind of work that seems to be staying as more and more technical services groups are outsourcing some of their work. And we're also seeing changes in the technical services workforce itself. Most technical service divisions are seeing a shrinking in the number of employees. And also we're seeing a change in the type of jobs or the titles that are in technical services, because again a lot of the functions are being outsourced, so that's changing what staff and what type of staff is being left internally in the library. And as I mentioned before with the kind of distributions question is, there's also more reliance on paraprofessional staff to be managing, kind of large projects and large functional areas that had previously been kind of the purview of a librarian. So these are some questions just to kind of ask yourself and to think about when you think about your technical services staff, either as from a manager or from an individual contributor, is, are you experiencing retraining or reskilling challenges? Are you having trouble finding job candidates with the skills that are needed? And also, are you losing critical knowledge with attrition, especially around retirements or just general attrition? And if some of those answers to those questions are yes, then I think it becomes even more imperative to start looking at employing talent management in your libraries or your organizations. There is also this need for talent management. The need is on the rise, and it's not just in libraries and not just in higher education organizations. It's in all organizations. But here's a few highlights. First of all, human capital is the largest, typically the largest university expense. So because it is such a big expense, it's really important that you're managing the talent, you have the right talent in the right position so that you're actually being able to meet your needs, since it is such a large investment. I think organizations are kind of moved past the idea that simply cutting budgets and moving around money around will make organizations more effective. There needs to be other solutions, and I would argue these solutions are, using these talent management processes, approaches, and having a talent management mindset. There's a call to align HR practices with organizational strategy, and really that's across organizations, because often what's going on in HR is kind of siloed within the HR world, and it's not aligned with the strategy, it's not aligned to the unique organizational demands, and it's also not addressing personal career aspirations. And here's just a quote from Ash that basically says that there's little formal programming in higher education that supports strategic talent management. So as a result, universities in general, and this is across the board, lag behind industry in their practices to develop and retain talent. So at this point in time, we know what talent management is. We know that the research tells us it's valuable. We know about the landscape in libraries and in technical services, which is, we need to do more with less, aging workforce that's turning into a younger workforce, technology that's driving the work and driving complexity. We're competing with the external market, the changing nature of technical services work. And this slide tells us that there are also already calls for more talent management. So I'm sure all your libraries have this covered, right? You got it in the bag. You have this fully developed and integrated talent management mindset and program that's closely aligned to your organizational strategy, which is helping you attract and retain and develop the staff you need to realize those organizational objectives. So if the answer to that question when you're thinking of your own organization is no, this slide is here to make you not feel bad, because there's a reason that your organization might not have a fully developed talent management approach and mindset. And that's because it's tough to implement. It is, as I mentioned before on that first slide, it's a customized solution. And so therefore it makes scalability tough. There are H&R client skill gaps, especially in strategy, so being able to implement a talent management program. Declining resources, implementing something like this does take time and staff, and we're having fewer and fewer resources. It is disruptive, and so does cause disruption often within the organization when you look at these things, but also it is the centralized tools which help support this and make this a little bit easier. These HRIS systems are often expensive and complex, and many of the organizations don't have access to it. So my co-author and I, Alita Lee, had looked at all these things and wondered, well, we know it's kind of tough to implement, but we were wondering, well, how are some research libraries implementing it? So we actually conducted an ARL survey for talent management survey in 2014, and if you're not familiar with ARL, it's basically the 125 largest research and university libraries in North America, and we distributed the survey to all 125 member libraries in July of 2014. We got a 42% response rate, and really the crux of the survey was to investigate which talent management strategies ARL libraries were deploying in order to manage and develop their organization's workforce. And so the survey involved 10 sections here, and I'm not going to go through all the results because there were 46 questions and a lot of data, but I do want to cover some of the key takeaways. But I'd also like to go ahead and ask, since I have a nice live audience here, ask a few poll questions that are similar to the questions that I asked on the survey. So if you can go ahead and launch the first poll for me. And so that is, the question there is, does your library have an integrated talent management process, programs, and norms that are aligned to your organization's strategy? So I'll give you some time here to answer. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll because most people have voted and it's looking pretty obvious here. So can we share the results? Can you all see the results? So the results are saying 95% no, answer to the question, 5% yes. I'm not surprised by that, especially because of my previous slides about having, talking about that it is tough to implement. But, and this really is reflected very much in one of the key findings that we found in our ARL survey, and that was there was a lack of systematic and strategic approach to talent management. And what we saw was that organizations where libraries were implementing part of a strategy, maybe professional development or performance assessment, but they were doing it in an ad hoc, informal, or fractured approach. So that integration was not there, which is key to talent management. I will say a few libraries had talent management programs underway, either in their library or their institutional level, but it was very few. All right, I'm going to go ahead and launch the second poll, which is, does your library have challenges around the retraining or reskilling of your current staff? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And again, this, I'm not surprised to see this, 93%, excuse me, of you do have challenges around that, with 7% not having challenges. And I'm going to ask one more poll question and then show you the equivalent results from our ARL survey. So the next poll question is, please check any skill sets below that your library has had trouble recruiting for recently. And you can check as many that apply. Okay, I'm going to give you a little more time on this one because this has more questions, so it's a little bit more complicated to answer. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll and we can look at the results. And some of these results, so as you can see, information technology expertise was the highest percentage of people having difficulty. Then functional expertise is the second, and 51% for subject expertise. And so let me look. Some of those reflect what we heard in the ARL survey, but we heard something slightly different. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about one of the second key findings that we found was this widening skill gap. So what you all indicated of that 93.7%, if I remember correctly, is exactly what we heard. So we heard that current employees were less able to be reskilled and retrained. We heard a lot, at least 48% had put that in one of their top 3 challenges. We also heard about many job candidates not having the skills that were needed, especially IT skills. The other challenge that they had was also around senior management and executive expertise, which is a little different than the results we just got from that poll, but definitely IT comes through really strong. So the third finding that we found in our survey, which really does mirror what we've just talked about, is really the identified need for IT skills and executive expertise. But we also found that organizations didn't have talent management strategies in place to deal with the fact that they needed those expertise. And a lot of those positions, specifically in information technology, 63% of the people, the respondents, excuse me, I say, surveyed said they had a very difficult time retaining those positions. But I will say what we saw in the results of the survey is that organizations might not be valuing the right credentials. 100% of the organizations indicated that an MLS was very important or important. But when we looked at other credentials like Masters of Information Science or other technical certifications and things like that, the percentage of those being important was much, much less. So I would argue maybe some organizations are placing the value on some of the wrong credentials, so that might be why they're not getting and retaining the people they need. There's a lack of retention strategy. They already knew that IT, that was an issue, but that yet they did not have a retention strategy in place to keep those staff. Leadership, lack of leadership development. Only 35% had a leadership development program in place, which tells you just might be losing a whole lot of people who would become certainly executive expertise, but also leaders in their IT areas. And lack of succession planning. 81% of the respondents indicated they did not have a succession planning strategy in place. I'm not going to obviously go too much into this because Sylvia is going to be talking about that in detail shortly. So what can you do? So, you know, this is important. You know the climate that's going on in libraries and technical services, and you know that, and you see that other people aren't really doing very much about it. A lot of other libraries aren't. So what can your library do? And there are lots of elements and components to talent management. So I want to kind of give you some places to start. So first of all, big picture. You need to align your HR and your talent management strategy to your library strategy. Really align it. So make workforce decisions based on those strategies. Work on the strategic priorities and challenges first. So things that are related to talent management, you know, answer these questions. Do you have the staff to meet your strategic priorities? What challenges are costing your organization? You know, is retention your problem? Recruitment, lack of leadership, lack of expertise, poor performance, whichever it is, tackle those first. Get the data if you don't already have it. You should be looking data about your recruitment. What are your candidate pools? How diverse? How often do you get your first choice candidate? You should be talking about retention. What's your voluntary turnover rate? What are those employee engagement scores? What do they look like? And make decisions, resource decisions based on talent management. So which positions get recruited for? What are those, how do you pay those along your salary ranges for which titles? So you really need to put your resources behind it. Programmatic, these things take time and resources and commitment, and they can be disruptive, but here are a few places you can start. I would say develop a competency model if you don't have one, and use it in your recruitment, appraisal, and development phases. And this is usually a kind of lower entry point and is not as disruptive. You might need to complete a job analysis to know that you have the right titles and you have the right functions in your organization and that you're recruiting for them properly. You might need to undertake a compensation analysis, but I will warn you, you make sure you have the resources to deal with the results, because if you do it and you find inequities and then you don't have the resources to correct that, then it typically is something you should not undertake, because that doesn't go over very well. And you should undertake succession planning, which I'm not going to spend much time talking about because Sylvia is. So what can you do as an individual, as either an individual contributor or a manager? So discuss these ideas with your HR support and your leadership of your organization if they're not already discussing them. Bring them forward. Review your organization's strategic plan and align your team's workforce to it as much as you can. Work on your team's biggest challenges first. Again, you know, identify is it retention, succession planning, developing current employees, and start there. And here are some programmatic starting points for you as well. You might want to consider having a formal process for identifying high potential employees for development. Create customized development plans for your employees. and develop a succession plan for your team. It doesn't have to be for the whole organization, but it can be for your team or unit. So these are kind of the resources for what I've discussed. Thank you so much for your time. And at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia, who's going to talk to you certainly in more in depth about that one aspect of talent management, which I referred to quite a few times, succession planning. Thank you.
Thanks, Meredith. What a great way to lead into talking about succession planning. Succession planning is a really interesting topic. We got interested in it, some of my colleagues and I, years ago, and this whole interest has grown and grown, and I'm excited to be here. This is a topic that is one with much more interest than we had even 6 months ago. There is probably a reason for this, and we're seeing some of the evidence of the reason that succession planning is just now surfacing at this level of importance that it could have had years ago. The research in this area is very modest. There are fewer than 50 articles in Library and Information Science that deal directly with the question of succession planning, results of a study of succession planning, or any other kind of data that help us understand the phenomena in our environment. That to me is concerning just from the very onset. We have seen, and today we saw again in the poll, that a majority of library or information organizations do not have written policies that deal directly with the question of succession planning. So only a small number of organizations in our environment actively are pursuing succession planning, oftentimes for reasons that cause tension for other priorities and other strategies that need to be in place to achieve their organizational mission. Yet, if we don't do something about succession planning, it won't happen for us, and we will find ourselves wishing we had people to work with us that we just simply don't have. Our problem with succession planning is being addressed by ALCTS, which has taken leadership in not only these two ways but others as well. We see the development of the President's Program at midwinter last year that focused on this area, and we had some great presentations at that time that are available from ALCTS. We also have today's webinar, and we have a number of interest groups and committees and task forces within ALCTS that are studying things like competencies that are definitely a piece of this work. So we know that our interest is growing. We're just not there yet. Succession planning, to give an example of how much interest it has had historically in our profession, is demonstrated by the fact that our online dictionary doesn't even define the term. So it seems that our interest has been elsewhere, and we have been focusing on issues that were important to us, and this one has come to the party a little bit later than some of the others. However, we have determined that the number of experienced and capable employees who want to assume leadership in our organizations has not really decreased. We have a number of individuals, I am thrilled to say, who are pursuing the coursework and the experiences through internships and mentorships to come into the areas of technical services. And that to me is very gratifying, because the number of schools offering some of these programs and the emphasis in these areas has not increased, and it was looking a little sad there for a while. So hopefully that will continue to prepare individuals to come into the part of the profession that means so much to most of us. We do, however, need to have a pool of talented individuals, and And unfortunately, we don't all have the depth of staffing that we would like to have, particularly in some of the more specialized areas, and technical services is certainly one of those. We have a definition, however, comes to us from business, and it basically tells us that what we're trying to do is prepare individuals to move in the organization, achieving leadership positions, contributing in greater ways, and becoming very important to us, but not necessarily moving only vertically, but also horizontally or laterally, or in some cases back and forth, up and down, around. The career path that was in place many, many years ago, which is you move up, you become this, you're an assistant, you become the leader of a unit, then you become a leader of a larger unit, is not necessarily the case anymore. So this process is really incumbent upon our skills and abilities to identify and develop our internal people who have skills that we haven't yet tapped and they haven't yet developed fully, so that they can assume leadership positions, and we don't always have to go down the street and snatch the employee from our neighboring library because they got a person we would love to have, and we find some way to entice that individual away. It is important for us to understand this, and so my first poll question, which is a pretty straightforward one, is, does my library have a succession plan? And I would just ask that to see if this is a piece of policy and practice in your library. So if we could launch this poll and ask, I think it would be very interesting to see what we find. So let's close the poll, because this is a pretty straight either you do or you don't question, and see what are the results. Well, a few of us have, 76%, 6% have one, 76% don't have one, and 18% don't know. My guess is if you don't know, the chances are pretty good that there is no policy in your library. If there were one, you'd probably know because one of your colleagues, your manager, your administrator would share this with you, or you would know someone who was benefiting from that plan and being groomed for taking on a greater leadership role. So chances are pretty good that virtually 80% of our libraries don't yet have a succession plan that is working for them. So what does this mean? It means that our communities of practice have lots of individuals with great talent that we may or may not be tapping, and that could account for some of the things that Meredith was suggesting from their survey and their work, as well as the things that we're seeing in our research. I've been studying competencies and different kinds of career pathways in technical services primarily for about 15, almost 20 years, and have been studying library leadership among deans, directors, and others at the most senior levels for about 6 years now. And what we are finding is that there is not only a shortage of people, but those who are hired may or may not have a library background, which causes us other challenges. We know that individuals in our profession seek promotion. They want to be important, they want to contribute, and they want to be leaders, but we may or may not be preparing them well ahead of time. They'd like to make a little more money, and they want to have influence and impact services and programs at their organizations. HR professionals traditionally are not embedded in libraries. While they may be present, they are more of have a compliance role and a role to help us in ways that were developed years ago. may or may not be as forward-thinking in all cases as we would like. So poll question number 2. Based on what you've been hearing today, do you think you would benefit from having a plan for succession? That is your personal development and growth to assume a greater level of responsibility and contribution at your organization. Let's open this poll and see what we learn. Okay, let's close the poll and look at the results. We're seeing here that at least 45% of you know or believe that you could advance your career if there were a good succession plan that tied with career development, learning new skills, and preparing to be the leader that you know you can be. 32% of you think this is probably possible. That's 3/4 of us, at least. And 11% are sure that they could. So we have 88% of us know that a succession plan would help not only us, but the people who work with us. That's pretty impressive. What we're seeing in the workplace impacts all of this. The workplace is changing. When I first went into the workplace, it was a very different environment than what we find now. I come primarily from public libraries, but have spent a lot of time in academic libraries. Most of my work has been in technical services and administration. What I'm seeing is that my colleagues, people I went to library school with, retiring, people who came after us retiring. I think that the impact of the 2008 recession is pretty much gone, and we are now seeing retirements every month. Somebody is saying, this has been great, and now I'm going to do something else. Our workforce is more diverse, but it's also tightening because we are competing with others for the kinds of skills that we want in our organizations. Skills and experience in libraries, experience in an information environment, really hard to get. And we are particularly challenged in IT. Workforce development in this country through the U.S. Department of Labor is really putting a lot of money into the preparation of IT folks, but they're being told both by employers and career counselors as well as training providers that they can make well over 6 figures if they go into private industry. And while that's great for them, it's not always so great for those of us in the library and information world, because that is not really a level where we can compete effectively. So we do have challenges, and those may not go away, but may in fact become more significant. We also have demands on professional development, but we have a reluctance for organizations to be able to invest dollars to support it. While we know that the rule of thumb is to spend about 6% of the library budget annually on professional development, that is beyond the capability or the ability of some organizations to pay. So we have that tension as well. There's also policies and procedures which pull us in other directions, and it's just, I think, a stressful situation. And succession planning is yet one more thing to think about. We also have diverse interests of our new and younger librarians. They are not the same folks who went to library school 10 years ago or 20 years ago or maybe even a little bit longer. They have opportunities not with libraries. They have opportunities for which the skills they learn in library school are very applicable, very appropriate, and very useful. But that means that they're taken from us, and it makes them think about well, should I stay with this organization or should I move within the university to a different environment or a different work group or a different department, or should I go somewhere else within the city or the county? And what can we do about this? Those non-traditional environments can be very attractive. Younger workers may or may not have the same level of loyalty to their organization that we see in some of the older workers. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's a reality of today's workplace. And also the desire to have a better work-life balance, which we didn't always emphasize in the same way. But there's a demand for flexible schedules, flexible locations. Can I do something, telecommute? Can I work from home? How can I respond and be contributing, but not necessarily get all dressed up and come in every day? That's a different environment than we had in the past, and it's part of succession planning, I think, because people who want that are going to articulate that need and say, can I get this? And the question becomes, well, can you? Oh, we can't advance. I can't advance my slide. Yes, I can. Okay. Number 3, competency-based education is the new theme. We're hearing it a lot in higher education, and we're hearing it in workforce development. This focus on knowledge and technical skills and competencies is one that we had years and years ago at the beginning of the 20th century when libraries were actually beginning to formalize training and education. We're reverting back to that. I think it's great. The problem is we're not really prepared to do as much of it as our employees and people who work with us demand. We also have not yet quite agreed on what are all the competencies. And of course, in every organization, there are local priorities and preferences and strategies and practices and collections and activities that impact the competencies and the skills that we know we need and generally add to them. We do have professional development, we have continuing education, and thankfully a lot of that learning can be done online these days, but it still takes time, and unfortunately it still costs money. Some libraries can underwrite this, some cannot. In some cases it's the responsibility of the individual to pay, and that may or may not always be possible. ALCTS has a lot of work going on in this area, and I think we're going to see some good reports coming out. But we still have to continue the day-to-day work, and we still have to make this happen while that agreement and negotiation and description of what we're really seeking in our employees 5 years, 10 years from now is happening. It is not the easiest way to work. It is also one that is impacting, and Meredith definitely referred to this, and I think we're going to see more of this, the emergence of new certifications, micro-credentials, and things like badging that have value in the commercial environment, the for-profit environment, but in libraries has not yet necessarily been adapted as much as I think it will be. The MLIS is not sufficient for a career long term. It just is a way to get started. I am convinced that without lifelong learning and a commitment to learn new skills, new techniques, adapt, and grow in the job, it will not be necessarily as rewarding a career as it can be. There is pressure for everybody to learn new things. There is pressure to recognize and understand the value of other credentials, and this is particularly true, I think, in the IT area, where there is a set of suites of credentials that matter to that profession that we have not yet embraced as much as we may need to in order to continue attracting and retaining those employees. So what does this mean for us? There are 4 basic methods to do competency models, and succession planning is really contingent upon understanding these. These are the 4 ways we generally do things. and they don't always work as well as we would like. We can hire somebody to do it for us and give us a report. We can hire somebody to teach us how to do the report ourselves. We can look at somebody else's model and adapt it, or we can sit and talk about it. These are all very interesting approaches, but we really need to move forward. And one of those strategies is probably the right one for your organization, just like our organizations all have to choose the path that makes sense for them. The succession plan needs to be part of the organizational long-range planning and focus on current and future needs of employees and the organization. So we need to be able to identify the knowledge, the technical skills, and the competencies in the folks that we must not only keep but retain and hire as new hires and onboard successfully. This is it is functional rather than position specific or person specific, and I think that is a great paradigm shift that we have not necessarily seen as much in libraries as we're going to see in the future. So why should we do this? It's significant because it gives us a source of replacements in-house. That cuts definitely the number of days and the work lost while we're hiring replacements for jobs that are vacated by persons either moving on, getting promoted, or retiring. So those folks leaving, every day that there is not that work going on costs us time and effort. We can reduce that with a good succession plan. We can keep people longer. We can prepare them for the future in our libraries and make those transitions more smooth. When someone retires and they take the institutional and organizational information and knowledge out the door, we can at least mitigate that and retain some of the good things that they know how to do that our new employees or our replacements need to be able to do. Talent management should work faster, and we should be able to reward people, offering them opportunities and incentives for personal and professional growth. Management continuity will be greater if we don't always have to bring in someone from the outside. The time and effort that requires from the time of announcing a position through the onboarding can be 6 months or a year. It's very expensive. It takes a long time, and in universities, search committees are not always able to find the person they can get to come. There's a cost involved in their work to try to get a new hire to recommend, and then there's the time that the work of that individual is not happening. So it's a very expensive process. We can control that if we can begin to do our planning and hire selectively the critical positions for which we do need to go outside, and also value the commitment and the contributions of our current people by allowing them to be part of the succession work and move forward in their careers. So I think that a succession plan also allows you to bring people in because they know there's a future here, not just a one-time job. So the first thing that we need to look at is how to prepare for this paradigm shift. This is a long process. It'll take quite a while. There are people who will want to get promoted or who will want to advance more quickly than this can happen. HR needs to help us, and they need to make sure that all of us are on the same page with this dynamic solution to a challenge. How do we get and keep the folks we want at our organization? Lattice career development has not been treated very much in the library world. I think that's an area that should be explored because it gives us options for folks to move horizontally, vertically, and diagonally within the organization. That's a new path for us. And then we need more deliberate career pathways which can be part of the assessment and performance review for an individual, as well as not only the next year's goals, but beyond that, so that we can look at 3 years and 5 years and what might you learn and what credentials might you acquire or what training can we support so you can move forward. Plan for the future and lay the foundations. Anticipate the challenges. Do a job analysis. This is not a skill taught in library school. It is a skill unique to folks in HR. It is something that takes time and effort. It will probably result in new position descriptions. It is an amazing thing in our work with research for both people in technical services and administrators to see how many positions from the same organization do not change one single word of their position announcement over years. And we have now seen that, and it gives us a clue as to why that search may or may not be successful. It is an interesting phenomena that I don't think has been studied formally. We need to start looking at the risk analysis of losing people. We need to figure out if our mission statement and some of the ways we do business need to be modified so that talent management and succession planning fit more closely. And then target groups. Who are the emerging leaders in our organization? What are their strengths? Do they have a strength that cuts across the group of folks? Is there something we should do for them as a group? Is it individual? Is it a mixture? We need to figure this out. We have to refine the program and do our action plan. I would point to books in the library world for this, but there really isn't one that I think is very helpful at this point. There are some great overview books, but there isn't anything like a handbook. This is how you do it. And that is something that we're needing in the profession desperately. We do know that we want to develop high-performance work teams. We don't see much about that either. But this is all, it all fits together as an approach for how we can build our teams for today, and from those teams identify and groom the leaders. Our succession plan is designed to help promote, to move us forward into the future. We also need to look at key requirements for key positions. Key positions don't necessarily have to be the lead administrator or the assistant director or the deputy. There are a lot of critical and key positions, and they are scattered throughout the organization. And I think we need to figure out where are they and who are they and what are we doing to make sure that our succession plan doesn't leave them out. And then we need to look at incorporating annual reviews. Oftentimes that is a process that is isolated from anything else, and we are not able to take the value of that conversation with the individual and use it to not only help them grow, but to help the organization grow. This is a mutually symbiotic relationship, and I think we don't always have time to sit and consider it in that way. We also have to have development programs, and we have to have more of them. The kinds of opportunities for learning that we're now seeing should be seen not just as professional development or a way to make attending a conference useful, but a way that each person can take back part of what they're learning and make a commitment that benefits both them and the organization. I know we say we do that, but I'm not sure it always happens. And then future work requirements. What is that job going to look like in 3 years? What are we seeing? What are the leaders in that arena predicting? And how do we know that our folks will be ready? Our succession plan needs to help us be there. So I have one more question, and that is, do I understand that there is a benefit for both me and my library or my organization if we had a good succession plan that took into account all of the elements that we need to have in place? Let's figure out if this is valuable. I think we can close the poll. Oh my gosh, you're voting like crazy. Oh my goodness, yes, this is valuable. Wow. Thank you. Let's close the poll and look at the results. 84% say yes, this is very valuable, and I do see a benefit, and we should be doing this. 3 people say no, 3% say no, not too excited about it. That's okay. Not everyone needs to do this. On the other hand, I think the leadership positions in the places that do it will be the places that folks want to go and work. There is additional reading, although please know there's not very much, and I've given just a little bit here. We're going to have time for some questions, and our moderator is going to help us with the questions. Thanks.
Hi, just as a reminder, you can type your questions for Meredith and Sylvia in the questions box on your screen. Just to start, there was an observation, I believe, about poll question 2. Someone stated that their response was sort of the opposite of your results. They don't have a hard time recruiting the IT experience, but they are in the Silicon Valley, so the regional workplace demographics may be at play.
Right, definitely.
Yeah.
So, how can an organization move forward when they have current employees that don't have the right skill sets moving forward and cannot be retrained?
Okay, I get that's probably a question for me. I'm sorry, can you repeat it again? Because I'm not seeing the questions on my chat.
No,
yeah, I'll just read them.
Okay.
How can an organization move forward when they have current employees that don't have the right skill sets moving forward and cannot be retrained?
Okay, well, first of all, it depends on how much flexibility you have with, you know, are they unionized? Do you have tenure? Those kinds of things. But you know, one of the things to think about is, you know, if you have staff that you can put performance expectations in place, so clearly identifying what you need that role to do and making it very clear, and then they can't be retrained, so they can't meet the expectations, then as an organization you need to decide that if you want to, you know, move that person out of the organization. If you can move that person out of the organization, is there a way that you can, you know, if you have attrition in another area, maybe retrain that person for that area and use that free line to hire that more something that is going to meet your strategic needs. So it's you know, it's kind of very situation specific, so it's hard to give just a complete answer, but I think you have to really you know, think about your tools. You should work with your HR department either in your library or the larger university or larger system HR to see what are your options, but you know, there are always you know, morale issues and things like that if you do move people out of the organization, so you have to kind of weigh the organizational costs of those kinds of moves as well.
Okay, thank you. What techniques would you recommend if the library wants to implement TM, but the university's HR is deeply mirrored in the traditional HR mindset?
Well, I think there's a lot that you can do in the library to, you know, you just might have to, you know, take a certain amount of local control. I don't know if this question doesn't say whether this organization has any HR capabilities in the library, or they depend, you know, solely on kind of the university level HR. So obviously, if you have some local expertise, use that expertise to kind of be that go-between with the larger university HR organization, because you know, usually there are obviously policies and things that you have to follow at the university level. But you know, a lot of it is just starting. I mean, things like succession planning. That's something that you know, you can do locally. It doesn't usually factor into larger organizational policies and things like that. So there's a lot of things that you can start to develop locally, some of the succession planning, development plans, starting to use development opportunities that don't even cost money, like stretch projects and job sharing and those kinds of things. So I think there's a lot that you can do locally that can be either locally driven by your HR person or even just driven by senior leadership or middle managers if the organization gets together and kind of prioritizes what pieces of talent management they feel are most critical, and they start working through those. You know, sometimes compensation and such is tougher because you're working within a whole salary structure and a salary plan that might be university-wide. So some of those things might be trickier, and you might have to do a little bit more negotiation with your central HR, but I think there's a lot that can be done locally that wouldn't need the approval or really the help of the larger HR organization on campus.
Okay. Our library staffing is pretty lean. How do we find time for succession planning, and who all really needs to be involved?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Every time we don't do succession planning, we've decided something else is more important. And I think that one of our kind of characteristics is that we talk about many of the same topics in libraries over and over. We're very good at check and reconfirm. We're very good at understanding something and making sure everyone's part of the conversation. I think succession planning is important enough that it needs to get onto the table, and it needs to be starting with the leaders. So if you have a head of reference or a head of technical services or a supervisor of branches or a supervisor of departmental libraries, it sounds like it's a smaller public library. You need to get those people in the room first, and maybe not have everybody at the table every time until there's been some momentum growing. It's hard to get started because time is valuable. On the other hand, if you don't start, it won't happen. And it needs to have enough interest and enough kind of buy-in for folks to identify the champions who will carry this forward. And until you get those people, the conversations will probably be a little bit slower and a little bit quieter, but a champion almost always emerges for every major project that ever happens, and this is no different.
Okay, do you see problems when a library does not perhaps have its own HR
Yes, yes.
within the library, because HR may not understand what's going on in the library and needs specific to the library, perhaps when they're at the university level? And
yeah, the university centralized because there's so many processes that really lend themselves to centralization. I always go by the theory that you need to get out more, and when I have been at universities, I get out and I go visit people and I invite them over, and I invest time in making friends, and HR is a place you definitely want friends. And to take anything like this on, if they only have the library as a place that generates lots of paper or lots of forms, online forms for salaries and reviews and promotions and hiring and the normal course of business, that's how they'll perceive you. So changing that perception by a real person, and let's have coffee and help me understand what you do and I'll help you, I think is a good investment of time and will pay off.
okay, are there any other questions people have? Go ahead and put them in the question pane.
Do I see questions in the question pane?
Oh, I'll read them if they come in.
Okay, because boy, those are tiny. Those are tiny panes. Really tiny.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't see any more questions. So thank you, Meredith and Sylvia, for your informative webinar on talent management and accession planning in libraries. Thank you to all of our attendees. We hope you found today's session useful. You will soon receive a short online evaluation form along with links to today's recording and slides. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions and return the form to us. Your comments are very valuable and help the ALCTS committee improve its webinars and plan future events. ALCTS now offers certificates of attendance to webinar participants. More information on this will be included in the email you receive. Information about all ALCTS webinars can be found on the ALCTS homepage. Please check out our web courses and upcoming e-forums. Suggestions for webinars and other continuing education opportunities are welcome at any time. Please contact any member of the ALCTS committee or submit a proposal for a webinar using the online form on the ALCTS webpage under Online Learning. I would like to thank Catherine Balick and Aping Chin Gaffey for providing technical support for today's webinar. The support they and their colleagues on the Technical Support Subcommittee provide make it possible for us to present these webinars smoothly. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you will participate in other ALCTS continuing education events again in the future.